What's up, everybody? This is Jordan again from Wednesday Night Warhammer, talking about some more Tyranids. With the new changes in Pride Nexus, the new data slate, I honestly feel like the invasion fleet detachment is more prevalent, stronger than it probably ever has been. So I thought it was a great opportunity for us to sit down, have a chat, and tell you why it is so good right now. In this video, we're going to go through a basic overview of what the detachment does. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it's been out for such a long time, but we're going to break down the stratagems, enhancements, and what stratagems I feel like are the best, and what enhancements I feel like are worth using and where they should be used. After that, we're going to go over the Pariah Nexus changes and why I personally believe that these changes make this detachment for Tyranids probably one of the best detachments, and how it works so well with what you want to do in this detachment. Then, after that, we're going to go through some key synergies using maybe some of the Pride Nexus changes, as well as just some underlying synergies that Tyranids have in general. After we discuss some strategies and synergies within the detachment, I'm going to wrap it all up with I think, a very strong all-arounder list that might be a good suggestion for you to start when you are testing and building invasion fleet lists. The detachment, it's the most adaptive detachment, I think, of all of them, or at least flavor wise. Basically, at the beginning of the battle, you're going to pick one of these three things. All right, you're either going to get sustained hits against infantry units, you're going to either get lethal hits against monsters and vehicles, or you're going to get precision on critical hits. I can honestly tell you that I have never chosen the third one in any of my games that I've played, which is a lot. And I honestly, waffle between the first two, but most recently I've been almost always choosing sustained hits, and we'll talk about why in a second. The stratagems in this detachment are actually very, very strong. So the first three stratagems that we're going to be talking about is first, Adrenal Surge. Remember that adaptive that you just chose over there. Instead of getting that bonus from crits on sixes, if you spend 2 CP with Adrenal Surge, you can get them on fives. It's pretty good. There's some really good opportunities for, any units that dish out a whole bunch of dice. You're going to get that buff, that benefit from Adrenal Surge, and it's going to help you just a little bit more. So I really like Adrenal Surge. It's a little pricey for 2 CP, but it's pretty good when you get it to work. Next up, Rapid Regeneration is probably the stratagem that just feels the most comfy, cozy to use at all times. Some people at the beginning of Pariah Nexus were worried about losing out on the second use of Rapid Regeneration, because you were able to do it twice with the Hive Tyrant. But honestly, I've been feeling that only being able to use Rapid Regeneration once has actually made me a little bit more careful in my gameplay. And I personally have not seen, it hasn't hurt me too much not being able to use it a second time in a phase. It's still a very, very strong stratagem. Just 1 CP, 5 up, feel no pain is very good. And then Death Frenzy, Violent Death on a 4 up. This is one of those stratagems that it seems kind of strong, but I really think you have to use it very sparingly, or else you're really not going to get your bang for your buck with 1 CP. I almost only ever activate this stratagem with my Gene Stealer brick, just because on a 4 up, there's going to be more chances of me to actually gain value out of that command point usage because of the higher number of models. Now, if you use it on, I don't know, like a monster or something, first step, I'm not really going to be happy that my monster's dying, so I'm just going to expect to make all my saves or whatever. And also, if you roll a 3 after it dies, then you want a tougher unit down and a wasted CP. So I always try and use that more on my units with more models, mostly Gene Stealers. Wrapping up our stratagems for this detachment, first one, we've got Predatory Imperative. 2 units in Synapse gain the benefits of an additional adaptive. Basically, you can, if you chose sustain hits for this battle, you can put 2 units in Synapse to also have lethals against monsters and vehicles. Or, vice versa, if you chose lethals, then you can 1 CP put 2 units into sustained hits. It's very good because you get 2 units if they're both in synapse. It's in your command phase, so you should be able to do things to make sure that they are. But also, if you just have one guy that's out on his lonesome that you really need to have lethals for this turn, then it is just 1 CP for 1 unit. That's okay. But one of the units we'll talk about later, the Neurotyrant, this stratagem is one of those reasons why I really think he is so good. Because in your command phase, before you pop this stratagem, you can throw out your Neuraloids, make sure whatever you need to be in the correct imperative is going to have synapse with such a long synapse reach. With the Neurotyrant, of course. Endless Swarm. Up to 2 Endless Multitude units can regain D3+3 models if they are both within synapse, 1 if outside synapse. It's 1 CP. This stratagem is very good. I think it's kind of slept on. It's kind of crazy how good it is, because if you spend 1 CP, both of your Gargoyle or Hormigaunt squads are within synapse range, then you know, at the bare minimum, you're getting 8 models back for 1 CP. I really think that's strong. In your command phase, you can do things like regrow them onto the objective, take primary back. If they were killed off an objective and there's only 2 or 3 left, you can regrow them to make sure that you still get that primary. I've done this many times. Make sure that your move blocking, your scoring units are still having the number of models that they need in order to succeed. And it's, I don't know, more dudes is always a good thing, right? You always want your little Griblies staying on the field. Last, but certainly not least, is a very powerful stratagem that's been a very strong stratagem for multiple editions. It's Overrun. Basically, after you fight, at the end of your fight phase, if you're not in an engagement range of an enemy unit, you can spend a CP and consolidate an additional 3 inches as long as you end your consolidate within engagement range of a different enemy unit, rather. That's not the good part, but if you're in synapse, you can instead do a normal move of 6. So one of the things that I like to do is charge my Gene Stealers on the point. I kill whatever they touch because that's what Gene Stealers do. Then, because the Broodlord synapse now, I can just spend a CP and then I can move them away from enemy units so that that charge is harder, or, you know, range distance are tough, and still be on the point, or really just direct wherever I want that unit to go. Overrun is extremely powerful if you are able to use it correctly. Our enhancements in this detachment are pretty good, but honestly, I think the strength of the detachment lies with the rules itself as well as the stratagems, but there are still a couple of little nuggets of gold in here. First up, we got Alien Cunning, redeploy 3 units for 30 points. It's, you know, redeploys are great. I feel like if you have a mastermind plan in hand in order to really make use of this redeploy, then I think you can capitalize on it rather. But, you know, otherwise 30 points is a pretty large investment to have on a stratagem that you're going to use it once, and then after the battle starts, you don't really see the effects of it too much. You know, besides the positioning of your units, it's all right. But I personally feel like a redeploy, especially now how redeploys are, before you know who goes first, I feel like a redeploy for 30 points, unless really strategically engineered in your game plan, I'm not sure it is always worth it. Next, we have Perfectly Adapted. Once per turn, reroll 1 hit roll, wound roll, charge roll, or saving throw for the bearer. And it's 15 points. I think this is a pretty good enhancement. It's one of those enhancements that it basically just says, oh, here's another CP reroll. You get a command point. It's pretty good. Rerolling a hit roll, wound roll, charge roll, or saving throw. Those are some very important things to make sure you're always consistent on. For me, it's probably going to be more of the charge roll or maybe a saving throw most of the time. I've had some success putting this on a Broodlord. So Gene Stealers can just go out and they, you know, we fail our 6-inch charge or whatever we're trying to make, then we don't really have to use our CP resources in order to CP re-roll it. Just to make sure that we get in and whatever unit is holding this enhancement is able to do what it's supposed to do. Most recently, though, I have had trouble fitting it into a list, and it is one of those things where like it's nice to have around, but it's not a necessity in my list building for invasion fleet, to have perfectly adapted. But it's cool to have. Third, it definitely something that is almost a necessity, I feel like, is adaptive biology. The bear has a 5 plus feel no pain. After it loses a wound, next turn it becomes a 4 feel no pain, and that's for 25 points. I almost always just slam this on my Hive Tyrant. The Hive Tyrant in this detachment of both kinds, either the winged or the walking, is definitely going to be one of those linchpin models that you are going to want to have for the duration of the battle, basically. And having a 5-up feel no pain in the first couple of turns when you're being cagey with your Hive Tyrant, and then for it to turn into a 4-up feel no pain, really, really, really makes that linchpin unit be able to be where it wants to and stick around for the whole battle. In addition, with the changes to Pariah Nexus and the battle slate, or the balance slate, it's pretty much your second rapid regeneration at this point. So you don't. I know we don't have two of them at the same time, but if you like throw a Maliceptor out in the middle, you can give him a 5-up feel no pain. Maybe your opponent shifts focus into your, something else. Your Hive Tyrant is exposed. You still have that extra durability on such a key piece in your army. Lastly, the Synaptic Linchpin. The bear has a synapse R of 9 inches and it's 20 points. I really don't think this is worth it. I think we have units that can just work around this and make sure we have synapse where we need it without having to spend 20 points. Been talking about him a lot, but Broodlord has synapse now. That was one of the models that I would often consider for Synaptic Linchpin. But now that he has synapse, I'm having a hard time really finding a reason to include this. The extra 3 inches is good, but honestly, if we position just a little bit better, I think we can make use out of synapse without it. Here's the exciting part. This is why bugs are good right now. All of these Pariah Nexus changes, the balanced data slate changes, primarily actually, that have really made lists like Invasion, detachments like Invasion, just really chug way better in the current meta. First up, Shadows in the Warp. It's an additional -1 while the enemy unit is within synapse. This is very good. I often play Tyranids like some kind of a pressure list that comes into different waves that's controlling the board state. So by turns 2, 3, and 4, you're going to have something in their face, probably like a Maliceptor, maybe a Broodlord brick, or even your Hive Tyrant or Zoanthropes up there. So while they are doing what needs to be done in order to control the battlefield, you're also going to give a negative, debuff to them to make their battle shock check even harder to do when you pop Shadows in the Warp. +1 strength while on synapse. This is very, very, very strong. Tyranids are actually, if you look at the strengths that are put on their base data sheets, we are actually hovering around a couple of very key breaking points for a lot of units. Maliceptor going from strength 7 to strength 8 is very good on the sweeps, and then his strength 9 to strength 10 is also really, really good. Wounding toughness 5 models on 2s, and then being able to punch into vehicles appropriately, like I feel like a Maliceptor should, is very, very strong. In addition, Gene Stealers going from strength 4 to strength 5 is phenomenal as well. Any marine equivalent model or unit, you now are going to be wounding on 3s, which is a huge offensive buff. 16% more of your wounds are going to be going through every time you activate with Gene Stealers. One more unit that I think comes very quickly to mind that benefits from this is Hormagaunts. Hormagaunts are actually very, very good right now, going from strength 3 to strength 4. You can attach a Neuraloid on them in your command phase, send them out, deal with some scouts or whatever that may be. Sisters are spooky right now, and Eldar is always around. So if you have your Hormagaunts that are hitting on strength 4 now, they're going to chew through most toughness 3 models in one activation, I would think. Just basically because of their amount of attacks, and now the fact that they're going to be wounding them on 3s instead of 4. This change is something that I was very excited for, and I'm very happy about. Is the Neurotyrant can lead Zoanthropes now? It's kind of funky, you know. I wonder if this was actually planned initially. He's always kind of looked a little Zoanthropy, you know. So I'm very excited about this, just because thematically I think it looks cool. I think it makes sense, and also game wise, that means Zoanthropes hit on 2s now. They hit on 2s, which is disgusting because of both of their gun profiles. In addition to Zoanthropes being buffed by hitting on 2s, they also get +1 to wound if the unit they're looking at is battle shocked. That hasn't come up for me too much, but it is definitely a buff. And then the last one that's kind of like a secret buff is that now they function with big guns never tire. You can shoot them into combat as long as you're not using the blast profile. And because of the exact wording of big guns never tire, the Zoanthropes themselves don't take the -1 to shoot. I am almost certain that this is going to get changed or patched in an FAQ or anything. So if you are watching this video in the future, it could very well be different already. But very excited about that. A brick of brain, boys. Over on the right side, Broodlord and the Neurolictor gain Synapse. I believe also the Parasite gave Synapse as well. But I think for Invasion, I think Broodlord and Neurolictor, that's a good focus to think about. Just like what I was talking about, +1 to Strength. That buffs the Broodlord a little bit more for a better breaking point, as well as the Neurolictor. The Neurolictor, not necessarily for the offensive, but in order to support some units that might not have Synapse inherently. If your Hormagaunts were not in range of a Neuroloid, your Neurolictor can maybe run up next to them in order to give them that essential buff to Synapse. In addition, in this detachment, you've seen all of the stratagems really depend on being in Synapse. So having just this independent unit like a Neurolictor running around the field, basically being wherever it wants to be, being able to give Synapse to those important units is definitely going to help your army benefit more from its detachment and stratagem use. So I think those two models having Synapse now is very key and important. Lastly, it's the Hive Tyrant. He gains lethals to his aura. So, it's assault and lethals within 6 inches of the Hive Tyrant. This is the main reason why I'm often choosing Synapse. I'm choosing sustained hits on my Hive Tyrant or on my army wide instead of lethals. It's because I play this army like a giant gun-lined castle, where we're kind of chilling around my Hive Tyrant. So most of my units are going to have lethals just because they're in close proximity of the Hive Tyrant. And if not, we can still spend a CP to put them into that lethals imperative if we need to. Then last but not least, the Exocrine and Tyrannifex cannons got buffed. The Exocrine strength went up to 9, and the Tyrannifex's rupture cannon went to damage 6 plus D6 instead of just 2D6, I believe. Strength 9 is not as huge of a breaking point as strength 4 to 5 with the Gene Stealers or strength 3 to 4 with the Hormagaunts, but it does actually really help Tyranids punch through transports. Things like rhinos, things like orc trucks, and things like I know a lot of the Drukhari transports are hovering around strength 8 and strength 9. So going from 5s to 4s, or from going from 4s to 3s on an Exocrine is very strong, because transports are something that Tyranids struggle with, and just having an extra punch and lethality into those profiles is incredibly useful. All right, key units within this detachment. Each one of these units, I think, really make great use of the buffs that our detachment gives us, whether it's just the adaptive that we're able to choose at the beginning of the game, or it's some key stratagems that we make use of throughout the play. I really think these units carry those buffs and stratagems very well and allow us to achieve our game plan incredibly successfully. First up is the Neurotyrant, and I've included him here because He is able to string out the synapse with neuraloids and really make sure that any unit that you have that is going to need synapse will have it. 18 inches is actually a very, very long range to string out the neuraloids. And if you're able to really just make sure you're thinking about your positioning, um, any unit that you are going to want to have synapse will be able to have synapse. In addition, he gives Zoanthropes a huge buff, +1 to hit all the time, and then +1 to wound conditionally with battle shocked units is a very, very strong buff. We did talk about the big guns never tire a little bit before. That is kind of a conditional buff as well, which is nice to have. In addition, the Shadow on the Warp buff, just making your opponent subtract from the leadership on every single unit in their entire army, is pretty good. I don't think it is necessarily as strong as I thought it was initially, but for the Neurotyrant to have those first 2 bullet points and giving buffs out like that, and then additionally he makes Shadow on the Warp harder for your opponents to achieve. He's a very, very strong choice in any list for Invasion Fleet. Another linchpin is our Walking Hive Tyrant. It's going to give assault and lethals. I definitely feel like Invasion Fleet is kind of like a shooting castle right now. It's kind of how the list, at least in how I play it, it revolves around 4 or 5 pieces that kind of group together to stack synergies on top of each other in order to be incredibly powerful. And I think the Walking Hive Tyrant is a great center of that castle. It gives assault and lethals. It allows for your Exocrines to get around those corners. It allows for your Zoanthropes to hop out behind terrain pieces. And then honestly, the lethals is just like the cherry on top again. So it allows for you to choose sustains almost all the time. And then as long as you're next to your Hive Tyrant, then it gives lethals and you're able to activate into tougher units and it still feel okay. In addition, free stratagems. The Hive Tyrant activates his free stratagem on your turn and your opponent's turn, which is very strong. So basically you'll have double the amount of CP usage if your opponent has something like a captain in their list. And activating the free stratagem on your turn, I think is actually very strong, because unless you're really setting up your go turn, I don't find myself using a whole bunch of CP on my turn with these lists. Maybe Adrenal Surge or something like that. Maybe a Rapid Regeneration in the fight phase. But so having this ability to have an additional CP allows you to do silly things like reroll charges, reroll number of shots for your mouse or Exocrine, reroll wound rolls. It opens up the possible use for the command reroll where you're not really going to feel ashamed for using it because it's basically a free CP, and if you don't use it, well, you lose it. And then last, he's kind of a beat stick, if I'm being honest with you. He's kind of this anchor point unit where he just carries the adaptive biology enhancement very well. So he can just run up the center of the table with a 5 up Feel No Pain, and he is tough to kill. 2 up armor with a 4 up invuln, and then a 5 up Feel No Pain is very, very, very strong. They don't kill him in one activation. That 5 up Feel No Pain gets even worse and turned into a 4 up Feel No Pain. He's a phenomenal unit, and he makes it into almost all of my list easily. Zoanthropes. We've talked about them in context with the Neurotyrant. They're very strong now. One of my favorite parts is that they have a strong versatility of their gun profiles. You either do the blast one, strength 7, AP2, D3 damage, is very good. If you activate to a 10 man of anything, you're going to get an average of 24 shots, hitting on 2s, and then probably wounding on 3s. That's going to rip through most things. I think Zoanthropes carry the sustain and lethals buffs very well. If you're going sustain hits, then you have the blast profile to pick up quite a bit of additional shots because of the weight of fire and for them hitting on 2s. So it's a good number of dice there. And then the lethals, well, of course, the last cannon always has lethals, but lethals on the blast profile is also very strong as well in case you just need number of shots, maybe into a more elite, a heavily armored unit. And then last is kind of just like a just thrown in there. They do provide a large bubble of synapse, a large defensive bubble, and they grant that benefit to a lot of units just basically because of their footprint. It's very strong. One more thing before we move off from the Zoanthropes, they're actually very durable as well. A 4-up invuln that you can pop a 5-up feel no pain on is really good, and even if they get charged right now, because of big guns never tire, you're able to still activate into whatever target they are sitting in on your turn. So if you pop a 5-up feel no pain after they're charged, they're probably going to stick around because of the 4-up feel no pain, and then they're probably going to annihilate whatever is in combat with them. Huge thumbs up on the Zoanthropes. Last but certainly not least is the Broodlord and Genestealers. I can't think of a unit that carries the buffs that this detachment does any better than the Broodlord and Genestealers. They make huge use of sustained and lethal buff just because of the weight of dice that they have. Stratagems work extremely well on them. They are actually surprisingly durable because they have the -1 to hit from the Broodlord in combat. They have a 5-up invuln with 2 wounds, and then if you throw up a 5-up feel no pain with rapid regeneration on top of them, it's actually very hard to shift a 10-man unit of Genestealer along with the Broodlord, and they just stick around, and oftentimes opponents think that they'll just disintegrate. It's really not the case, and then they become a huge problem for your opponent's backfield if they stick around for a whole turn. And then, we've talked about it before, but Strength 5, of course, is a phenomenal breaking point. First step on our key synergies is just this phenomenal gun line that Tyranids have access to, the Exocrine, Maleceptor, and Zoanthropes. And honestly, I oftentimes activate those units in this order because first up, the Exocrine is going to shoot at something. It's going to provide reroll 1s to hit for whatever else activates in the army, which is kind of funny because, like, if you think of it, I just said one of the main reasons why I activate the Exocrine is to give the reroll 1s to hit, but also its gun is very strong. Strength 9, AP3, 3 damage apiece. That's going to rip through a lot of elite infantry units, and it is going to put a dent into some light vehicles as well. But after that, then you have a Maleceptor, which I can activate into. I know my footnote there just says it hits hard, but honestly, it's just a good gun too. You're going to get rerolls to 1, hopefully, from your Exocrine. You're going to get a good number of shots, so maybe you get an additional sustain or lethal depending on your adaptive. And it's just one of those units that is just tough to get rid of and tough for your opponent to see activating into them. And then lastly, I try to finish up this gun line with the Zoanthrope brick just to kind of finish off whatever is left there. I really don't like splitting shots because I want to make sure whatever I'm activating into is dead, but honestly, this unit is pretty good at splitting in one way where you have the Neurotyrant attached. He can flamer 1 unit, and then your Zoanthropes can look at something else. I have a couple of times split, have like 2 models do the blast profile and then 4 do a last cannon somewhere else. That is beneficial as well, but splitting fire is always a little bit tough. Anyways, regardless, I strongly encourage you have this gun line in your invasion fleet list if you're testing out this detachment. I normally never leave home without 2 Exocrines and 2 Maleceptors, and then 1 big brick of 6 Zoanthropes. Staging your invasion, kind of leaning in a little bit to the fluff of the detachment. This detachment is supposed to be the main invading force of any Tyranid high fleet, and I think actually in the gameplay as well, it provides that too. So, I always like to have my Hormagaunts or Gargoyles move block or initiate trade wars. That means, well, 1, move block if my models are in front of my enemy's models, then my enemy's models cannot move through them. These are both very fast units. Either the Gargoyles go out, advance, shoot, and then scoot. They can move up to 22 inches. They can move up to 24 inches in a turn if they roll a 6 on their advance. And that's very strong. You can get basically anywhere you want to with your Gargoyles or your Hormagaunts. They can go out, advance, charge something. Even if they don't kill it, they can just tie it up for a turn and then make it just really annoying for your opponent to get around the battlefield in a way that they would want to. In addition, for initiating trade wars, that means if those units go on an objective and they're threatening to score primary for your next turn, your opponent has to do something about them, or they're just going to stay there and score points. So if I go out and send my 65 points of Hormagaunts out there to take an objective, my opponent is going to have to do something to get rid of them. So if they go out and send their, assault intercessors or whatever to kill my Hormagaunts, that would be very sad. But also that leaves them out in the open for my Gene Stealers or my Psychic Castle of Guns to just go up and, counterpunch and take over that point, which really they traded their big hitting unit or whatever for my Hormagaunts, and then my stronger units are in a stronger position on the field in order to capitalize on their data sheets. I spoke about it a little bit, but Gene Stealers, I like to have them scout behind cover for a counterpunch. If you are moving your Gene Stealers out in the open turn one and hoping for a 6, 7, 8-inch charge, I personally don't believe you are using them correctly. I think you need to hide them behind a wall that is close to the center objective and let them pounce on whatever your opponent throws out there as a strong counterpunch, and then allow for the Gene Stealers to push further into your opponent's deployment zone. Don't send them out immediately. I promise you will fail your 8-inch charge turn one. So just wait, let your opponent come out, and then punch really hard with the Gene Stealers. And lastly, with this invasion, this wave of different units, the Psychic Castle that we talked about with the Zoanthropes, Hive Tyrant, Narrow Tyrant, Maleceptor, after the Gene Stealers have started pushing into your opponent's deployment zone and counterpunching through those trade units, that kind of conglomerate of models and units, Maleceptors, Hive Tyrant, Zoanthropes, it's just going to kind of take up the midfield, and it's just going to offer this brick wall for your opponent to have just a really, really hard time to activate through and clear up. All right, so one of the hardest questions, I guess, with this detachment is, when am I going to know when to take sustained and when am I going to know to take lethals for the beginning of the battle? Just a quick little flow chart, not even, but most of the time take sustained, silly. If you are going against something like Chaos Knights, Imperial Knights, or like Greater Demon Span, then honestly take lethals, sure. But a lot of the time, a lot of armies are going to have a certain number of infantry models that is just going to allow you to make benefits of the sustained buffs. And then if you really, really need lethals, you can add lethals to multiple units, to 2 units, using the predatory imperative stratagem in your go turn, quote unquote, and you still will have the most of your army still gaining the benefits from sustained. And worst comes to worst, your Hive Tyrant now gives lethals regardless. So instead of worrying about activating into tanks or whatever, if you just have your castle appropriately placed, then you're going to get sustained and lethals into any infantry unit, and you're going to get lethals regardless into any monsters or vehicles that you activate into if you're close enough to your big old buddy Hive Tyrant. So when in doubt, sustain it out. I thought it would be a shame if I didn't do a big tactics video on where Tyranids are right now in Invasion Fleet and not talk about our buddy the Biovore. I could honestly do an entire video on things that he can do, but I just want to touch on a couple of really cool things that this Biovore still does. He doesn't score any action secondaries anymore. Probably shouldn't have been able to ever, but here we are. He still does score engage. He still does score behind enemy lines because your Spore Mine is out there living its best life and in some part of the battlefield. Okay. Next up, he turns off advances. Nothing can advance within 6 inches of the Spore Mine. That is very good. If you're playing against World Eaters, if you're playing against Orcs, it could really honestly shut down their go turn by just putting one Spore Mine somewhere where they can no longer advance. In the same vein, it move blocks and cuts movements. Even though it explodes after your opponent's units have finished their movement. So that means they can't get within engagement range of the Spore Mine. So for instance, if you have an enemy unit that moves 10 inches, right? You put it 9 inches away, it can only move up to like 8.9 inches because it has to stay outside of an inch of the spore mine, and it can't advance as well. So you're cutting off at least 1, maybe 2 inches of movement because they can't get within engagement range, and then it's also disallowing your advance of your enemy's units. It's very good at just telling your opponent where they can or can't move their models. In addition, if I don't have any opportunity to do something cute like that with movement shenanigans, it screens deep strikes. Turn 1 or 2, turn 2. Honestly, a lot of time, if I'm not getting a secondary that is going to benefit from the Biovore, I just put it somewhere and it can screen off deep strikes. Turn 1, I'll just activate it into the opposite corner of the battlefield and just screen out 9 inches of deep strikes so that it doesn't allow for my opponent to activate and then place a unit down there. Incredibly helpful. Last but certainly not least, it just sits on your home objective. A lot of armies have to pay points for units that are really not going to activate at all for their entire game and just sit there on the home objective. Your Biovore is scoring primary every single turn and still activating and shooting spore mines and doing other things. It's protecting your home field and also doing everything else. It's a huge plus that I think is often overlooked. Okay, this all comes together for a list that I would love to share with you. This is the list that I've been having the most amount of success with, and I've been having a lot of fun with it. It uses all the pieces that we've been talking about and puts them together for a very, very strong all-arounder list. My characters, I have the Broodlord. He'll be attached to Gene Stealers. Hive Tyrant with Adaptive Biology, and the Neuro Tyrant. Just a strong core of characters. Not too many. We're not really proccing assassination or anything, but we still have very good character support where we need it. Battle line, I have 2 squads of Gargoyles and then 1 squad of Hormigons. I normally keep 1 squad of Gargoyles in the sky to deep strike. Turn 2 or turn 3 and steal an objective. That if my opponent I feel like is going to deep strike a lot of things, maybe I'll keep the 2nd squad down and just really take over the board. But also another way that I use these battle line units is, yes, I love to move block, and yes, I love to take objectives, but I honestly try to play a little bit more defensively with my battle line units now because of secret missions and because of how strong battle line units are in Pariah Nexus. As a rule of thumb, I generally only try to throw out one of these move blocking pieces a turn so that I can really make sure that I'm making full advantage. I'm taking full advantage of all of my pieces in my army. So, throw your battle line units out to die, your Gargoyles and Hormigons, but be very careful of when you choose to do that. Our other data sheet's basically the core of the list. The rest of it, the Biovore, we just talked about how good he is. We love him. He's awesome. Gene Stealers, the great counterpunch, great threat unit to just sit near an objective and jump out and take out whatever is taking that. 2 Exocrines, the foundation of our gun line. We spoke about them before. Really good gun that hands out really good buffs to the rest of the army. 2 Lictors. I'm incredibly high on Lictors right now. I think they're very good to score secondaries. They fight first. They initiate trade wars as well, like the Gargoyles and Hormigons. And the free rapid ingress is really nice to score secondaries or, to just threaten a flank that your opponent wasn't thinking about. Then 2 Maliceptors. I love these Maliceptors. Maybe to a fault. I don't know. They're just very, very strong, defensive. It's tough for them to die, especially if you get them close with their -1 to hit aura. And their gun is very strong as well. Next up, we have the Neurolictor. Neurolictor is great because he's a lone op. He can do a lot of lone op shenanigans. He also procs Battle Shock and, makes it tough for your opponent sometimes to activate fully into your army because they will have the speed bump there of the Neurolictor. After that, we have the Pyrovore. I really like to use the Pyrovore together with the Maliceptors. Maliceptor's Bane is cover because they only have AP2. So if you get rid of their cover, then that allows for them to, essentially have +1 AP. So instead of always having a AP1 gun with the Maliceptor, because everything has cover, then you're able to allow the Maliceptor to function fully by ignoring cover with it. In addition, he just sometimes comes down and does secondaries. That's great. 3 Raveners. I'm also very high in Raveners. I think they're great. They are often helping my Biowar screen the backfield. And then almost every single time my opponent ends their turn, I'm going to uppy downy my Raveners just to make them go into deep strike. So whatever secondary I draw, they can activate accordingly. Last but not least, the zone throws. It's just a big hammer that gets out there and deals enough damage to hopefully take the game for me. I love this list. I would be really excited if some of you tried it as well, and let me know how it does. All right, everyone, that was our invasion fleet detachment discussion. As always, let me know what I got right. Let me know what I got wrong. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you Wednesday.